Hello students, welcome back to the discussion upon the mains question paper of this year 2022. Now in today's session, we are going to discuss the aspects of the question paper GS-3, and as part of GS-3, in this section we are going to discuss the part of environment questions and the disaster management questions. And when you look at this particular section of GS-3, this year it was more to do with the convention based kind of questioning. And not only the convention based questioning, but this has also got to do with some of the current affairs kind of extrapolations have been made in the questioning pattern. And when you look at the analysis of this question, the section that is environment as well as the disaster management, you would see that there were around 50 marks that were asked from environment and there were around 25 marks that were being asked from disaster management, which is a definite proportion that is maintained by UPSC in every year's questioning, right? Now looking at these questions moving forward, you see that this had different sections being asked, and when you look at these questions, now in this, the question number 6 was from environment again, which is a very tricky question and it might appear like a surprise question, but when you look at the question, each year a large amount of plant material called cellulose is deposited on the surface of the earth. What are the natural processes this cellulose undergoes before yielding carbon dioxide, water and other end products? Now this question might appear under the exams as a very surprising question and as a very weird question. From where is this cellulose being asked? What is the scientific process of cellulose? Is it necessary to start reading about the scientific process here? But when you boil it down and think, this is simply a question on decomposition process. In the environment, you study the various steps that are involved in the decomposition process, where you see both the organic as well as the inorganic processes being present. That is what is the questioning pattern, right? Now, when you look at the 7th question is also part of environment that discuss in detail the photochemical smog, emphasizing its formation, effects and mitigation, and explain the Gothenburg protocol. This was again little surprising to ask about the Gothenburg protocol, but those who have prepared this aspect as part of your prelims examination, you could have happily answered this question, because it is asking about the basics of the chemical smog or the photochemical smog formation, which is otherwise called as the Los Angeles smog, right, which is fundamentally formed out of your nitrous components, right. Then when you look at the question number 8, this question number 8 has got to do with the disaster management. And when we look at this question number 8, explain the mechanism and occurrences of the cloudburst in the context of Indian subcontinent and discuss 2 recent examples. That Amarnath Yatra issue that happened, and in that context you would know that the fundamental geographical phenomena of cloudburst was discussed elaborately. Now they have asked this cloudburst mechanism in the context of the disaster as a topic, right? Disaster as a topic, because this was an expected question either in GS1 or either the respective questioning in GS3, right? It has come in GS3, right? Next, that's what I told you, that this year paper was little convention based as well as the current affairs basis. Now when you look at the 12th question, again we can consider that as part of the environment question. Do you think India will meet 50% of its energy needs from renewable energy by 2030? Do you think India will meet 50% of its energy needs from renewable energy by 2030? Justify your answer. Right, it is asking about the India's efforts in transitioning towards the sustainable energy, transitioning towards the green energy, and we know that as part of the Panchamrit and as part of INDCs, we have claimed to stick to the renewable energy demand. Right? How will this shift of subsidies? How will the shift of subsidies from fossil fuels to renewables help achieve the objective? Explain. Right? How is the shift of subsidies? That means fossil fuels to renewable. That means we know that Indian energy is all driven with the coal, on the basis of the coal, or around more than 50% of that energy is on the basis of the coal. So it is asking about how will the nature of the subsidy shifting from the fossil fuels to renewable energy, is it going to favor this kind of transitioning or meeting the energy demands of 50% through renewable? That is what is the question, right? Now again, 12th question can be considered as the environment question. Then apart from that, we can also consider question number 17. Question number 17 being part of environmental question. Discuss global warming and mention its effects on the global climate and explain the control measures. Explain the control measures to bring down the level of greenhouse gas which causes the global warming in the light of Kyoto Protocol 1997. So again, this is asking about the global warming. That's what I told you. There they asked about Gothenburg Protocol in the context of the photochemical smog. Here they are asking about the Kyoto Protocol 1997. Right? We were supposed to discuss this aspect, right? Now let's look at the what can be the nature of the structures that can be followed in this context of the environment as well as disaster management. And question number 18 is also part of disaster management question. Explain the causes and effects of coastal erosion in India and what are the available coastal management techniques for combating the hazard. For combating the hazard, because you know that the coastal erosion is one major issue that is occurring, and you would see that would also result in other domino effect kind of disasters coming in, domino effect kind of hazards setting in. And the vulnerability and the exposure of the coastal communities will fundamentally increase to the other disasters, for example, like the cyclones. Okay, so those aspects have to be discussed in this particular question. Now let's look at what kind of structures can be followed with respect to these questions of disaster as well as environment. Now when you look at the first question in the environment that they are talking is with respect to the plant material called cellulose. The plant material called cellulose is deposited on the surface of the planet Earth, and what are the natural processes this cellulose undergoes before yielding carbon dioxide, water and other products. Now when you look at the fundamental question it is asking about what is that kind of decomposition process that is generally followed. Now the question is all about the decomposition process, and here we can simply introduce by writing that cellulose is a kind of biopolymer. Cellulose is a kind of biopolymer. You know that the cellulose is fundamentally used in most of the polymer industry. So this is a biopolymer, and when you look at it being a biopolymer, you know that, and not only biopolymer, it is fundamentally an organic product. It is an organic product, and you know any organic product will certainly have the carbon dioxide, the water as emissions, for the reason that the composition of organic product is these four main elements, that is your hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen and oxygen. And once we discuss about this cellulose as a biopolymer in the introduction, that is what is the question talking about. It is asking about what kind of natural processes this will undergo. Now as part of this question, when they are asking you in the context of body, right, in the context of body we can say that when you look at this, they are asking about that what kind of natural processes is it going to result in. Now when you look at the what kind of natural processes this is going to result in, we can see that the natural processes can be the organic process as well as the inorganic process. The natural processes can be the organic process as well as the inorganic process. Now once we talk about this organic process and inorganic process, because this natural process is nothing but it is talking about the decomposition process, and when you look at the different stages that are present with respect to the decomposition process, you would get to understand that these natural processes is organic and inorganic. And when you look at this, I told you that this is a relation with the decomposition process that is present. And once we talk about the different stages of decomposition process, we know that it is FL Chem. The code that we use for knowing the different stages of decomposition is FLChem. Initially F, that is fragmentation. Once this process of fragmentation happens, then we have the process of leaching. Once this process of leaching happens, then we have the process of catabolism. And once we have this process of catabolism, it moves to the process of humification. Humification. And once this humification, it will result in mineralization. And in this process, what happens is, because of this process of mineralization, because of this process of humification, because of this process of catabolism or leaching, what happens is, there is one particular transition that is generally observed here, is that it is transforming from an organic component to the inorganic component. That is what is the fundamental process of decomposition that is being asked. And here the natural process is that only. It is talking about the natural process, right? And this kind of cellulosic degradation and this cellulosic decomposition, or the element that is seen here, is very, very important for you to understand the dynamics of the cellulose, right? And again, one more thing maybe we can add, apart from these processes, we can also talk about that what is going to be this rate of these natural processes. What is going to be this rate of these natural processes, right? When we talk about this rate of natural processes, we know that this rate of natural processes is going to depend upon number of other parameters, like what is going to be the temperature level, and what is going to be the levels of oxygen, what is going to be the levels of the water that is present, or is it a water saturated region, is the case. Or not only that, it is going to also depend upon what is the inherent nature of that particular substance which is being degraded or which is being decomposed. And when you look at the inherent nature of the substance, whether it is being degraded or decomposed, you fundamentally know that if it has some complex substances, for example lignin, for example chitin, now when such complex substances are existing, you know that the rate of decomposition is fundamentally going to take large amount of time. Now that particular dynamic can be discussed here in this context of cellulosic substances and the corresponding other material. So the first part of the answer could have been this, that is with respect to the cellulose. The second part could have been what are the different steps that are involved, and as part of the different steps that you could have talked about FLChem. And the third part, to bring in dynamism, we can even talk about what is going to be the rate of these natural processes that are occurring. Then you could have simply concluded its application with respect to the present existing industry, present the biopolymeric industry that is flourishing, and that is becoming a point of research for the reason that cellulose is seen as one of the very, very important additive that is used in the polymeric industry, right? That is, again, although it is a surprise question, although it is something which is demanding out of box thinking, but you need to understand that it is boiling down to one of the fundamental processes of decomposition, right? This is the general thing that we generally do when we are writing a question in the mains examination. Now when you are writing a question in the mains examination, one thing we see is that if that question is something surprising, if we fall short of any content that is present, what we generally do is we boil down to the crux of that particular question. We boil down what is the inherent content that has to be written and what is that hidden concept in that particular question, and we break the question and we attempt that question so that we can generate the content. And syllabus becomes a very, very important point for you to generate such content, right? Moving on to the next question, that is with respect to discuss in detail that what the photochemical smog. The photochemical smog. And here what are they asking? They are asking about 1. Formation, 2. Effects, 3. Mitigation. So they are fundamentally having 3 parts that are being asked in the question. 1, it is talking about the formation. 2, it is talking about the effects. 3, it is talking about the mitigation. This is the first part of the question. And when you look at the next part of the question, it is talking about 1999, the Gothenburg Protocol. This is the second part of the question. So when you look at this aspect, that is your Gothenburg Protocol as well as the photochemical smog emphasis, here you get to see is that now in the initial question, in this introduction, we can write about what is a photochemical smog. We can write what is a photochemical smog, and we know that this photochemical smog, the fundamental prerequisite is that you need sunlight for it to form. You need sunlight for it to form. Apart from that, you also know that this is fundamentally formed out of the nitric components. It fundamentally formed out of the nitric components. This is one. Apart from that, we can also talk about its inherent characteristics between the brownish grey type, the brownish grey haze. The brownish grey haze that is fundamentally caused, right? This can be said with respect to this photochemical smog. And apart from that, when you look at the formation, because that is what is the body talking about, in the body that we are supposed to emphasize three aspects. One is formation. Two, we are supposed to emphasize upon the effects. Three, we are supposed to emphasize upon the mitigation. Right, these three aspects we are supposed to emphasize here. And once we look at this particular aspect about the body, in that once we talk about the what is going to be the formation of photochemical smog. And when we look at the formation of photochemical smog, that it is fundamentally formed out of a chemical reaction of the sunlight as well as the nitrogen oxides. The sunlight as well as the nitrogen oxides, right? This is going to result in formation, and also this can also be formed in the presence of the hydrocarbons or volatile organic compounds. The volatile organic compounds will also result in this formation of smog or the photochemical smog. And the fundamental component is going to be the UV component of the sun rays. And once we talk about this, we are supposed to talk about what are going to be the effects. And when you talk about this, what are going to be the effects with respect to this, you would see that the first aspect with respect to effects, you would see that it would also affect with respect to the visibility parameter. Not only the visibility parameter, it will also have major effect with respect to the human life. And when you look at the human life effect, that human life is with respect to the health parameters. Apart from the health parameters, we can also talk about the economic systems which are being impacted by such a kind of photochemical smog formation. And apart from that, we can also talk about how is it going to impact the plant life. What is its impact on the plant life? And when you look at the impact of the plant life, we know that the budding stage of the plants can also be impacted because of this photochemical smog formation, right? And apart from that, as we know that this is nothing but a secondary pollutant that is present. This is derived from the secondary pollutant that is present, which is again further leading to the effects with respect to this. Then we talk about what is going to be the levels with respect to the mitigation. How can we mitigate? Now, when you look at the mitigation, it fundamentally deals with the mitigation in the context of emissions of the nitrous components. Emissions of the nitrous components, that might be with respect to the vehicular emissions, that might be with respect to the industrial emissions, especially the emissions which are depending on the fossil fuels, right? Those can be impacted or those can be regulated in order to manage this. Once we talk about the emissions and once we talk about this, we can even talk about the smog towers. We know that the smog towers can also be an element in managing this smog as a phenomena. And then now we have to talk about the second part, that is the Gothenburg's protocol. The Gothenburg protocol. And when you talk about the Gothenburg protocol that was given in 1999, it fundamentally dealt with the pollutants. It fundamentally dealt with those pollutants which result in acidification, and also such a kind of thing to manage the ground level ozone. And it sets limit. This sets limit upon the sulfur dioxide, the nitrous oxide, and also the ammonia. Then apart from that, with respect to the volatile organic compounds. And again, it provides a legally binding emission reduction commitments by 2020. This was fundamentally updated in the year 2020. And we also need to know that India is not part of this protocol. That's what I'm telling. Such a questions can be handled, or this question demands a decent amount of balance on the understanding and the information condition. Because what happens is, in this context, what happens if you would have prepared enough for your prelims with respect to your environmental section, it is very, very definite that you would have come across this Gothenburg protocol, for the reason that you would see number of conventions in which India is part, in which India is not part, right? This is the 10 marker with respect to the environment. Then moving on to the next question with respect to the 10 markers, that is, do you think that India will meet 50% of its energy needs from renewable energy by 2030? So it is asking a kind of opinion that has to be formed. Now please remember, opinion, it is all to be substantiated. It has to be an informed decision. It has to be an informed decision. It is all to be substantiated. Right? Now here, justify your answer. That's what it is asking about, the justification. Then how will the shift of subsidies from fossil fuel to the renewables help the above objective? Explain. So, the question itself is asking you whether this is sufficient. And the question itself is giving you a way forward to justify whether that whatever you took a stand in the above question, is it sufficient or not? That is what is supposed to be seen here. And here, when you look at this particular question, it is fundamentally asking about the raising energy demand. The raising energy demand. It says that the energy demand is going to rise by 40%. The energy demand is going to rise by 40% for the reason of the extent of development in India that is happening, also the extent of population growth that is seen. And it is anticipated that by 2026, India is going to be the largest populated country. With such kind of understanding, there is going to be a 40% increase in the energy demand. And we know that on the flip side, there is a kind of dichotomy that is existing along with this energy demand, that you will see that more than 50% is dependent on the fossil fuels. More than 50% of the energy is dependent on the fossil fuels. And in this context, you need to understand that there is going to be a kind of balancing condition or strict balance that is being demanded in this context, right? In this context. Now here it is asking about, will 50% of the energy needs from the renewable energy by 2030, will India be able to meet? Now here, we are supposed to talk about the India efforts. What are the efforts that are taken by India in meeting this renewable energy target? Renewable energy target. And what are the efforts that are taken by the India in meeting this renewable energy target, that is making it 50%, and we are supposed to evaluate this part. That is it sufficient or is it not sufficient? This is what is going to be the structure, and this is what is going to be the evaluation in this question. And once you are able to say that whatever initiatives that have been taken by the India, it might be with respect to your solar energy, it might be with respect to ISA, it might be with respect to the hybrid energy policy, or it might be with respect to the wind energy policy, will it be sufficient? Or is it not sufficient? What are the challenges that are existing? Because when you look at the challenges that are existing with respect to this transitioning or making this 50% renewable energy, the major aspect is the cost involved. And not only the cost involved, the second dimension that you see with respect to the challenge that is involved, here you would also see the technology availability. The technology transition, along with the technology transition, the technology adaptation. And apart from that, we would also see that this renewable energy is a kind of, it is intermittent in nature. And such a nature of the energy which is intermittent in nature, it is not suitable for base loads. But such a kind of intermittent kind of energy is majorly suitable for a peak load kind of understanding. That is little technical in the context of energy studies that we generally discuss in the class. Right? So that is with respect to India efforts. And once we evaluate this, now it is saying that yes, we have seen that the first and foremost aspect with respect to this is the cost is a parameter. And the question itself is giving you a solution to tackle such kind of the challenge that is present in the kind of transition, when you see that it is saying, this is the first part of the question. The second part of the question, it is saying that shift of subsidies Shift of subsidies from fossil fuel to renewables. From fossil fuel to renewables. Now here, now you know that this is going to provide a monetary support. This is going to provide a monetary support with respect to the subsidies that are provided. Now with this kind of subsidies, what is it asking? It is asking whether it is going to enable us to meet the objective or it is not going to enable us to meet the objective. This is what is the evaluation question demanding. Now when you look at, yes, it is going to enable us to meet the objective. One dimension you can say that it enables to promote the technology, it enables to promote the installation aspect. And not only this, it also enables to promote the research element that is present with respect to the renewable energy and renewable energy studies or sciences. That can be done. And when you look at the, no, it is not sufficient, because what happens is such a kind of subsidies will certainly not handle the intermittent nature. The intermittent nature of the kind of energy that is derived from renewable sources. And not only this, but also the rate of adoption. For the reason the technology availability. And not only the technology availability in the context of India, but also the renewable energy and the technology that is being, or the indigenous technology. That is what is we can put. The indigenous technology with respect to the renewable energy or the renewable sciences. Right? That is what is the question asking about. You can straight away conclude it by saying it demands a mixed approach. It demands a mixed approach for the reason that we can shift towards cleaner fossil fuel technology. And it being augmented, the cleaner fossil fuel technology, for example, the clean coal technologies, for example, coal washing technology or desulfurization of technology, the coal, that technology can also be promoted. Cleaner fossil fuels. Along with that, you can also talk about renewable source of energy as a augmentation, not as a replacement. That can be the kind of conclusion that can be given in this question, right? Then 17th question, it is asking about the discuss the global warming. This is first part, and mention its effects on global climate change, right? Also explain the control measures to bring down the level of greenhouse gases which causes the global warming in the light of Kyoto Protocol. Now here it is not simply asking you about the measures, it is asking about the measures in the light of Kyoto Protocol. And when you look at this in the light of Kyoto Protocol, now what is it going to discuss about? It is going to be about that first thing you can talk about, what do you fundamentally mean by global warming as a phenomena? And once you discuss about this global warming as a phenomena, you know that this is fundamentally resultant of the kind of greenhouse gas layer that is present, and because of which you know that there is this short wave radiations which are incoming and long wave radiations which are not able to escape, for the reason that the thickness of this greenhouse gas layer is increasing. As the thickness of this greenhouse gas layer is increasing, you would know that the phenomena of greenhouse gas effect, the greenhouse gas effect is going to increase. And as this greenhouse gas effect is going to increase, the fundamental aspect that you would see is that you would observe the entrapment of these long wave radiations is going to increase. The long wave radiations are increasing, which will further increase the warming effect. And such a phenomena is what is called as global warming. This is the simple understanding and the simple explanation that you can talk about this. Apart from this, what is happening is the inherent nature of global warming is the temperatures are rising. And on this basis of the rise in the temperature, now we can talk about what are going to be the effects. What are going to be the effects with respect to the global warming? And once we discuss about the effects, that effects with respect to the global warming, that is fundamentally due to the rising temperature. That rising temperature might result in what? These effects might be with respect to the atmosphere. The effects can be with respect to your atmosphere, because with the changing of temperature, you know that the weather conditions as well as the climatic conditions are going to vary. right? Because we have already discussed in the geography session that there is going to be an inherent relation that is existing between the temperature and the pressure. That is what is supposed to be discussed here. Apart from that, you would also see not only the atmosphere, you would also see the hydrosphere will also be impacted. Not only the atmosphere, the hydrosphere will also be impacted. For example, you will see the heating up of oceans. The heating up of oceans, right? Apart from the heating up of oceans, you would also see the aquatic ecosystem, the aquatic organisms will also be impacted. Then apart from that, we can also talk about that how is the lithosphere going to be impacted. The lithosphere, especially the phenomena of desertification. The phenomena of desertification is going to set in, the phenomena of land degradation that is going to set in because of the soil microclimate being disturbed because of the raised temperatures. Apart from that, we can also discuss that how is it going to impact the cryosphere. Cryosphere, when I talk about this cryosphere, it is nothing but the cold regions, the snowy regions, the glaciers, because they are going to melt. And they are going to melt, and as they are going to melt, what happens? You know that the sea level rise is going to happen, and because of which you would also see there is fundamental kind of coastal erosions and the coastal intrusion of the sea water, the coastal intrusion of the salt water which happens, right? Apart from that, you can also talk about that how is it going to impact the human life at large. How is it going to impact the human life at large? That impact with respect to human life can be with respect to the health condition. Not only the health condition, the economic systems, because you know that with the raised temperatures, you would have certain impact with respect to health, certain impacts with respect to the skin aspect. That has to be taken care, that has to be remembered here, right? Then apart from that, then we have to talk about that what are the measures. Now there, the third, this is the first part, this is the second part, and the third part they are asking about is what are the measures to be taken. And when you talk about what are the measures to be taken in this context, they're talking about what are the measures to be taken. Now, here you need to understand what kind of measures that can be taken, and these measures have to be in the context of Kyoto Protocol. Because you know that with respect to Kyoto Protocol, it fundamentally focuses upon handling with sigma 6 gases, that is the carbon dioxide, the methane, then sulfur, nitrous oxide. Then apart from that, it also deals with respect to PFCs, it also deals with respect to HFCs, it also deals with respect to SF6, sulfur hexafluoride. So this Kyoto protocol, it is going to deal with the sigma 6 GHG or the greenhouse gases. And here we have to talk about the mitigation as well as adaptation measures. That has to be talked about, mitigation as well as the adaptation measures. The adaptation measures both have to be discussed in this adaptation, right? So whenever we are discussing about these measures, especially in the context of climate change, one thing we have to emphasize is how are we going to do this with respect to your mitigation as well as adaptation. Now when you look at this mitigation and adaptation in the context of Kyoto protocol, one major emphasis that has to be made in this context is the carbon markets. The concept of carbon markets, the concept of carbon markets, the concept of the carbon credits, and the concept of that is with respect to your emission trading, clean development mechanism, joint implementation. These aspects have to be discussed because the examiner is very categorical about asking about Kyoto protocol in this context only. Then other mitigative measures, then other adaptive measures, especially in managing what? In managing the greenhouse gas concentration, and you know that every greenhouse gas would have something called as global warming potential, right? So that is the correlation that is existing with respect to this greenhouse gas and global warming potential, which has to be managed, right? And simple conclusion you can talk about, and the simple conclusion in this you can talk about is the, either you can conclude it with Panchamrit, the concept of the carbon neutrality. This can be one particular concept that we can discuss about in the conclusion, the carbon neutrality. And apart from such a kind of conclusion in the Panchamrit, or you can even talk about the INDCs. INDCs that were categorically made in the context of Paris climate change. Apart from that, we can say that there was a shift that was made from clean developmental mechanism to sustainable developmental mechanism, SDM, that is part of the Paris Climate Agreement. Paris Climate Agreement COP21. That can be discussed, right? Any of these three conclusions you can give with respect to such a kind of question, right? Then with this 4 questions of discussion, that is, one is with respect to the plant material cellulose, then photochemical smog, then with respect to your the renewable energy, that is question number 12, and question number 17, we finished the environmental section. Now moving on to the disaster management part. And when you look at this disaster management part, we already told that this particular section of the examination had 25 marks of weightage, which is very, very regular, and 25 marks every year that has been asked from this section, right? And when you look at this particular questioning, again I told you that when I was discussing in the geography section, I already told you that the geography explicitly or implicitly has made a comeback. Explicitly 100 marks in the context of GS1. Implicitly that it is talking about the cloudburst as a phenomena, right? And it is talking about the coastal erosion as a phenomena. Now here, that your coastal erosion is nothing but what? That you study in your geomorphology as part of exogenic processes. Because in exogenic process, you would discuss about weathering, you would discuss about the degradation, you would discuss about the denudation, you would discuss about the mass movement, you would discuss about the erosion. The 3 major aspects that you discuss as part of the exogenic processes, right? Now moving on to this here, explain the mechanism. Moving on to the question in disaster management, let's see that explain the mechanism and occurrence of cloudburst in the context of Indian subcontinent, right? In the Indian subcontinent. And is the question simply saying that it is also talking about that it is also talking about the examples, the recent examples that they are emphasizing upon, the recent examples that they are emphasizing upon. Now when you look at this particular question, that we have to give these 2 examples, right? Now we can say the simple definition of cloudburst. The simple definition of cloudburst that can be given as an introduction, which is given by IMD. Now when you talk about the IMD's definition, it talks about that unexpected precipitation. Unexpected precipitation. Unexpected precipitation, that is, which exceeds around 100 mm per hour. Which exceeds about 100 mm per hour across a land of 20 to 30 square kilometers. That means this is a very, very objective definition that has been given by IMD. Certainly this such a kind of mentioning would certainly give you a edge with respect to this. Then the next part of the question is asking about what is the mechanism and occurrence of cloudburst. The second part of the question is asking about what is the mechanism and the occurrence of the cloudburst. And when you look at this mechanism and occurrence of the cloudburst, you know that it is fundamentally asking about the cloudburst as a phenomena, and you see that it generally happens with respect to your cumulonimbus clouds. It generally occurs in the cumulonimbus clouds. It generally happens with respect to cumulonimbus clouds. And when we look at this process and mechanism of occurrence, we have to fundamentally emphasize upon the formation of cumulonimbus clouds. Because any cloud formation is nothing but the process of condensation that generally happens. And when you look at any condensation process to occur, one thing you would know with respect to the condensation process to occur, you would see that one thing is very, very definite, that is with respect to that you would need a condition of saturation. Apart from a condition of saturation, you would also require with respect to not only the saturation, you would also need, that is with respect to the condensation nuclei. So both are supposed to be the prerequisites with respect to the condensation as a process. And when you look at such a condensation process happening, and when you look at that there is an very, very effective convective process. When there is an effective convective process that is happening, you would see the formation of cumulonimbus clouds happening. Cumulonimbus means those which are very, very tall, vertically expanse clouds, which are dark in nature, which are opaque in nature because of the abundance of the condensation nuclei and the abundance of moisture that is present. And here what happens is, now because of the formation of the cumulonimbus cloud and because of this vertical expanse, what we would see, there is a sudden precipitation. There is a sudden precipitation, and such a suddenness in the precipitation as a phenomena is what is defined or what is understood as cloudburst. That is what is the simplest mechanism. You could have used a flowchart kind of mechanism in this context of explaining the mechanism as well as occurrence. When you look at the occurrence, it is generally seen in the mountainous regions. It is generally seen in the mountainous regions, or it is also generally seen in the regions which has abundance of condensation nuclei. It is generally seen in the regions of abundance of condensation nuclei, especially it might be the urban centers, because we would have come across a number of such incidents of urban centers having this phenomenon of cloudburst, which is further resulting in the phenomenon of urban floods, which is a very, very favorite topic of UPSC. Right? Then, and when you look at the susceptibility of these regions, when you look at the susceptibility of urban, or when you look at the susceptibility of cloudburst as a phenomena, it is highly susceptible with respect to Uttarakhand, Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh. All these are the regions which are highly susceptible to this cloudburst as a phenomena. When you look at the recent incidents, because that is what is the second part of the question, which is talking about the recent examples or the recent incidents. One we can talk about that happened in August, that happened in August 2021, that is with respect to Nepal and Uttarakhand cloudburst. The Nepal and the Uttarakhand cloudburst, this is one particular kind of thing that you can mention here. Then apart from that, we can also talk about that happened with respect to the Kedarnath floods that happened in 2013. The Kedarnath, the Uttarakhand floods that happened in 2013, that is again an incident that shows, right? Then here we should not leave this question in an open-ended manner. We have to talk about that what are the measures that can be taken to tackle such an incident of cloudburst. Because what happens is that the inherent nature of this phenomenon of cloudburst is all sudden. When the inherent nature of this cloudburst is all sudden, what it fundamentally results in, the sudden nature of the disaster would result in the higher levels of destruction. So in such incidents, in such regions where you have cloudburst being highly susceptible, we can say, or that regions being susceptible to cloudburst, we can talk about the mitigative, or we can talk about the preparatory mechanisms. Sending out the alert systems or your IMD predictions, right? All those things can be improved upon with respect to the managing of this cloudburst as a phenomena, right? This is one question in the context of disaster management. The second question that is seen with respect to the context of disaster management is explain the causes and effects of coastal erosion in India, and what are the available coastal management techniques for combating. It is asking about available coastal management techniques in combating the hazard. And when you look at such a particular question with respect to the causes and effects of coastal erosion, when you look at this question, it is first asking about, in the introduction we can talk about what is it, or what do you understand by coastal erosion. Or apart from this, we can say that the coastal expanse of India. The coastal expanse of India, we know that the coastal expanse of India is around 7,500 kilometers. Around 7,500 kilometers, we know, which is a large expanse with respect to the India as a subcontinent. From there, we can talk about that what are the causes. What are the causes with respect to the coastal erosion? And when we are discussing the causes with respect to the coastal erosion, one particular structure that we generally follow as part of the disaster management, which we will again discuss as part of the IAS Purana, you would see that one particular cause we talk about is the natural causes. Natural causes, and we talk about the disasters like tsunami, we talk about disasters like flooding, disasters like cyclones. All these are fundamental natural causative phenomena or factors for coastal erosion. Then apart from that, the second aspect we can talk about is what are the anthropogenic causes. This is what is the broader structure that we generally follow in disaster management. What is the anthropogenic causes? And when we'll talk about this anthropogenic causes, it fundamentally talks about what, my dear? It is with respect to the developmental process that is seen, the coastal developmental process that is seen. Apart from that, we can also talk about the impact of the sand mining. The impact of the sand mining, right? Then, moving on to what are going to be the effects. Now, when we talk about what is going to be with respect to the effects of coastal erosion, when you look at the fundamental effects of coastal erosion, this effect is with respect to the environmental effect. That is, especially it is talking about the coastal ecosystems. How is it going to impact the coastal ecosystems with respect to the aquatic biodiversity, with respect to the mangroves as a structure, with respect to the water resources that are present. Apart from that, its impact on the human life. Its impact on the human life, that is, we have said that there is going to be a salt water intrusion that is generally seen as part of this coastal erosion, and also the buffering capacity of certain vegetation that is present in this coastal region will also be impacted. That is what is this particular question asking about, talking about effects. Then it is asking about that what are the available measures. That is asking about what are the available measures or with respect to the management techniques that are seen. And whenever we are discussing about measures, we know as usual, as we discuss in the class with respect to what kind of measures that can be seen in a disaster management, we see that there can be two kinds of structural. One is what is called as the structural measures, the other one is the non-structural measures. One is the structural measures, the other one is non-structural measures, right? So these both aspects can be discussed in this context. One is the structural measures, the other one is non-structural measures. And as part of structural measures, it might be with respect to the embankments, it might be with respect to the wall systems, or it might be some kind of constructive phenomena that can be done in the context of the management of these coastal erosion as a phenomena, right? Structural and also non-structural. Non-structural may be strict legislations. For example, we have something called as the coastal regulation zone, CRZ rules, right? We have something called as the CRZ rules that we generally discuss, okay? Those CRZ rules that we have. So this can also become one very, very important aspect when it comes to managing of the coastal erosion as a phenomena, right? Okay, so in this particular discussion, we have seen with respect to the questions that are asked in 2022 UPSC question paper in the context of GS-3, that is environment as well as disaster. Now, one thing please remember, my dear, you need to remember that in this environment and disaster section, it is not, certainly the content is going to play a major role, but please remember the structure of the answer is going to determine what is the nature of the mark you are going to get. Because along with the structure in this particular questioning, the understanding of the question becomes very, very important. Not only that, once you talk about the structure, we also need to emphasize a large about the +1 strategy that we always discuss as part of LIACS Purana. The +1 strategy. And here is, for example, if you talk about this particular question on coastal erosion, if you have to look at the +1 strategy, one thing you can say, you can simply draw a map upon the coastal regions and we can point out that in which all regions you would see that such a kind of erosion is happening. That's the simplest way of representation, and it would definitely promote the ways of representation and the visibility in the answer, right? So +1 strategy has to be followed in this context, right? So with respect to this, structure is going to determine the nature of the marks that we get. Apart from that, not only this, we are also going to determine our scoring in these sections of environment and disaster through examples, because this is a real-time subject that has to be discussed and there is a real-time phenomena that is occurring. And you would see that questions are in context of those real-time incidents that are happening. For example, the cloudburst phenomena. So examples has to be given, right? These are the components when you're writing an environment or a disaster management question. Okay, and with respect to the internal security, we would come up with another video on the internal security as well as the other subjects and the other aspects of the previous year questions. Okay, thank you.